"Sir, that meal isn't for you. We don't serve steak to passengers who clearly can't appreciate it." Diana Blackwood's voice cut through the gentle hum of the first-class cabin like a blade through silk. Her words hung in the recycled air of Atlas Airlines Flight 447, heavy with contempt, and dripping with the kind of casual cruelty that comes from years of unchecked authority. The man standing quietly beside Seat 1A didn't flinch. Jonathan Rivers, dressed in faded jeans, a simple gray hoodie, and worn white sneakers, simply looked at her with calm, dark eyes that held depths she couldn't fathom. He had been waiting patiently for his meal service, the same filet mignon that every other first-class passenger had received without question, without interrogation, without insult. But Diana had made her calculation in less than 3 seconds. Black man, casual clothes, wrong neighborhood. "I ordered the steak," Jonathan said quietly, his voice measured and professional. "It's what I selected during booking." Diana's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I'm sure you did, sir, but we're experiencing some inventory challenges today. I can offer you the chicken instead. I think you'll find it more suitable." Behind him, Richard Coleman, a loud real estate mogul in an expensive navy suit, was cutting into his perfectly prepared filet mignon, the meat pink and tender exactly as it should be. His wife was doing the same. So was the woman in 1F, the businessman in 2D, and every other passenger in the premium cabin, every passenger except one. Isabella Cruz, the young flight attendant with kind eyes and trembling hands, stood frozen by the galley watching this unfold. She had seen Diana do this before, subtle, plausible always, with an excuse that sounded reasonable until you noticed the pattern. Until you realized that the inventory challenges and system errors and special circumstances always seemed to affect the same kind of passengers. "Ma'am," Isabella whispered, approaching Diana, "we have 3 steaks left. I just checked the Ms. Cruz." Diana interrupted, her voice ice cold. "I need you to handle the beverage service in economy. Now." Isabella's face flushed. She glanced at Jonathan, then at Diana, then back to Jonathan. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. She was 26 years old, supporting her mother and younger brother on her flight attendant salary, and she had learned in her 2 years with Atlas Airlines that challenging Diana Blackwood was career suicide. She walked away, her shoulders slumped with shame. Jonathan watched it all unfold with the patience of a man who had seen this performance many times before. What Diana didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in 8 hours, when this Boeing 787 touched down at JFK International Airport, every person who had participated in this moment would be unemployed. Because the man they were humiliating, the man they had decided wasn't worthy of the service he had paid for, was Jonathan Rivers, founder and CEO of Pinnacle Aviation Holdings, net worth $8.2 billion, and as of 72 hours ago, the new owner of Atlas Airlines. But they didn't know that yet. They saw the hoodie, the worn sneakers, the lack of flashy jewelry or designer luggage, and they made their assumptions. They looked at his skin color and decided he didn't belong in their first-class cabin, regardless of what his ticket said. They were about to learn the most expensive lesson of their professional lives. "The chicken will be fine," Jonathan said finally, settling into his seat with the calm dignity of a man who knew exactly how this story would end. Diana's smile widened, satisfied with her victory. She had put him in his place, maintained the standards of her cabin, protected the comfort of the real passengers. She turned on her heel and walked away, her head held high, completely unaware that she had just destroyed her own career with a single devastating sentence. In the seat across the aisle, Elena Rodriguez, a freelance journalist with 800,000 TikTok followers, had heard every word. Her phone was already in her hand, camera angled discreetly, finger hovering over the record button. The plane hadn't even finished climbing to cruising altitude, and the story that would make headlines around the world was already beginning to write itself. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you've ever been treated like you don't belong somewhere you absolutely do belong, this story is for you. Atlas Airlines Flight 447 was a modern Boeing 787 Dreamliner, one of the most advanced aircraft in the sky. The first-class cabin featured just 12 seats each, a throne of buttery leather and polished wood trim with enough space for a passenger to fully recline into a flat bed. Soft blue LED lighting created an atmosphere of exclusive luxury, while the gentle whoosh of the advanced air filtration kept the cabin comfortable and quiet. This was premium travel at its finest, where passengers paid upwards of $4,000 for a round-trip ticket and expected service that matched the price tag. Every detail was designed to make travelers feel valued, respected, and welcome. Every detail except the attitudes of some of the crew. The flight from Los Angeles to New York would take just under 6 hours, crossing 3 time zones and carrying 247 passengers from all walks of life. In economy, families squeezed into narrow seats. Business travelers worked on laptops, and young people traveled on savings they had been accumulating for months. But in first class, the expectations were different. Here, passengers were treated like royalty. Champagne before takeoff, multi-course meals prepared by award-winning chefs, warm towels, premium bedding, and service that anticipated every need before it was expressed. Unless apparently your name was Jonathan Rivers and you didn't look like Diana Blackwood thought you should. The irony was crushing. This aircraft, this route, this entire airline now belonged to the man she had just insulted. Every seat he had been told he didn't deserve, every meal he had been denied, every moment of discrimination he was experiencing, it was all happening inside a company he now owned. Atlas Airlines had been struggling for years, hemorrhaging money and losing market share to more innovative competitors. That's why Pinnacle Aviation Holdings had been able to acquire it for $3.7 billion, a fraction of what it would have been worth a decade earlier. Jonathan wasn't flying Atlas today as a passenger. He was conducting what his business school professors would have called a ground-level diagnostic, experiencing his new acquisition from the customer's perspective, identifying problems that spreadsheets and board reports couldn't reveal. He had expected to find operational inefficiencies, outdated technology, maybe some training gaps among the crew. What he hadn't expected was to become the target of overt discrimination from an employee who had somehow survived 28 years in the industry while harboring attitudes that belonged in a different century. But here they were at 39,000 feet above the American heartland, and Jonathan Rivers was getting a masterclass in everything that was wrong with the company he now controlled. If you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of how they dress, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because this story is just getting started and what happens next will shock you. Jonathan Rivers hadn't always been a billionaire, but he had always been invisible. Growing up in Detroit, the son of an auto worker and a school teacher, he had learned early that the world made assumptions about him based on his appearance. As a boy, store clerks followed him through aisles. As a teenager, teachers were surprised when he earned the highest grades in calculus. As a college student at MIT, classmates assumed he was there on athletics rather than academics, despite the fact that he stood just 5'9" and had never played organized sports. Each incident had been a small cut barely noticeable on its own. But over the years, those cuts had formed scars, and those scars had hardened into armor. Jonathan learned to navigate a world that constantly questioned his right to exist in spaces of wealth, education, and power. Now, at 42, he was worth more than most small countries. Pinnacle Aviation Holdings was his fourth major company following successful ventures in software development, renewable energy, and commercial real estate. Forbes had profiled him 3 times. The president had sought his advice on economic policy. Harvard Business School taught case studies based on his acquisition strategies. But success hadn't erased the memories. If anything, it had sharpened them. The laptop resting on his tray table looked unremarkable. A 5-year-old Dell with a worn keyboard and a screen that flickered occasionally. Most tech billionaires carried the latest MacBook Pro or custom-built machines that cost more than most people's cars. Jonathan kept this old laptop for sentimental reasons. He had coded the original algorithm for his first billion-dollar company on this machine, working 18-hour days in a cramped apartment in Palo Alto, surviving on ramen noodles and pure determination. The fitness tracker on his wrist was a $99 model from Target, not the luxury smartwatch that other executives favored. His backpack was a simple black canvas bag he had owned for 8 years. His sneakers were clean but clearly well-worn, the kind of shoes that spoke of countless miles and careful budgeting. To anyone looking, he appeared to be exactly what Diana had assumed, someone who had lucked into a first-class seat through an upgrade, a contest, or perhaps a gift from someone with real money. They couldn't have been more wrong. Jonathan had booked this ticket under his own name precisely because the Atlas reservation wasn't integrated with the new Pinnacle ownership structure. He wanted to experience the airline as a regular customer, without the red carpet treatment that came with being recognized as the new owner. This was his standard practice. When he acquired a service company, he always spent time as an anonymous customer first. He had worked undercover shifts at his hotel chain, stood in line at his retail stores, and called his own customer service departments with fake complaints. Every time he had discovered problems that never appeared in board reports or consultant studies. Rude employees who drove away customers, inefficient processes that wasted time and money, cultural issues that poisoned the entire operation from within. But this felt different. This wasn't about efficiency or profits. This was personal. At 24, fresh out of MIT with dual degrees in computer science and economics, Jonathan had been denied entry to a private investment club dinner in Boston. The hostess had looked at his discount suit and assumed he was there to deliver food. "Service entrance is around back," she had said, not even looking at the invitation he was holding. He had stood on the sidewalk for 10 minutes, invitation in hand, watching through the windows as venture capitalists and tech executives networked inside. The humiliation burned worse than the cold November wind. That night, he had made a promise to himself he would never again be denied entry to anywhere. Not because of his clothes, his age, or his race. He would build enough wealth and power to own the building, not just enter it. At 28, he had tried to book a table at an exclusive restaurant in San Francisco for a business dinner with potential investors. The hostess had quoted him a 6-month waiting list, then immediately seated a white man who had arrived after him and made a reservation the same day. Jonathan had eaten at McDonald's that night and spent the rest of the evening working on the business plan that would eventually make him his first $100 million. At 35, he had been questioned by security at a luxury hotel in Manhattan where he was attending a conference as a keynote speaker. The guards had insisted on seeing his room key 3 times, convinced that a black man in jeans and a polo shirt couldn't possibly be a guest at their 5-star establishment. Each incident had added another layer to his determination. He didn't seek revenge, he sought ownership. He bought the investment club that had rejected him and turned it into a diversity-focused networking organization. He purchased a stake in the restaurant chain that had discriminated against him and mandated sensitivity training for all staff. The hotel company became part of his real estate portfolio, and its discriminatory security practices became grounds for immediate termination. Power, he had learned, wasn't about making people pay for their prejudices. It was about making sure those prejudices couldn't hurt the next person who came along. Now, sitting in seat 1A of Atlas Airlines Flight 447, wearing the same kind of casual clothes that had marked him as other for most of his life, Jonathan was about to conduct the most important undercover assessment of his career. He hadn't expected to become the target himself. The laptop screen flickered as he opened a document titled Atlas Assessment, Initial Observations. So far, he had noted the outdated interior design, the inconsistent service standards, and the need for technology upgrades throughout the cabin. Now he was adding a new section, Cultural Issues, Discrimination Protocols. Diana Blackwood had no idea that her interaction with him was being documented by the future owner of her company. She couldn't have known that her casual racism was about to become the catalyst for the biggest transformation in Atlas Airlines' 70-year history. But that was about to change. Jonathan closed the laptop and leaned back in his seat, watching Diana serve champagne to every other passenger in first class while studiously avoiding his row. She was professional with the others, warm, even asking about their destinations and making small talk about the weather. When she reached his row, she walked past without making eye contact. The pattern was clear, undeniable, and about to become very expensive for Atlas Airlines. Diana Blackwood had joined Atlas Airlines in 1996, when the company still commanded respect in the industry, and first-class service was an art form. She had been 20 when she started, fresh-faced and eager to see the world, convinced that she was joining an exclusive club of professionals who maintained the highest standards of luxury travel. 28 years later, she was the senior flight attendant on the most prestigious route in the Atlas network, and she wore her authority like armor. The airline industry had changed dramatically during her career. Budget carriers had democratized air travel, making it accessible to people who had once considered flying a luxury beyond their reach. The internet had transformed booking, allowing anyone with a credit card to purchase premium seats that had once required connections or insider knowledge to obtain. Diana viewed these changes as a degradation of standards. In her mind, first class was meant for a certain type of person, the kind of person who understood the unspoken rules of luxury service, who dressed appropriately for the privilege, who belonged in spaces of refinement and elegance. She had developed an unofficial screening process over the years, a quick visual assessment that determined how much attention each passenger deserved. Business attire earned full service. Designer accessories warranted extra consideration. The right shoes, the correct luggage, the proper bearing. These details told her everything she needed to know about who deserved her best efforts. And then there were passengers like the man in seat 1A. Hoodie, jeans, worn sneakers, no visible signs of wealth or status. Probably an upgrade passenger, someone who had lucked into first class through miles or a last-minute airline mistake. These passengers, in Diana's experience, didn't understand the etiquette of premium service. They ordered multiple drinks, asked too many questions, and generally disrupted the refined atmosphere she worked so hard to maintain. It was her responsibility, she believed, to maintain standards, to protect the experience for passengers who truly belonged in first class, to ensure that Atlas Airlines continued to attract the kind of clientele that justified the premium prices. She had mentored dozens of flight attendants over the years, teaching them her methods. How to identify upgrade passengers, how to provide minimum service without appearing discriminatory, how to encourage certain types of travelers to choose other airlines in the future. Isabella Cruz was proving to be a challenging student. The young woman had been with Atlas for 2 years, and she still insisted on treating every passenger equally regardless of their appearance or demeanor. She served the same champagne to everyone. She smiled at passengers in wrinkled clothes with the same warmth she showed to those in designer suits. She acted as if the price of someone's ticket was the only qualification they needed for respectful service. It was admirable in theory, Diana supposed, but impractical in reality. The airline industry was built on class distinctions, on making passengers aspire to better service by demonstrating what they could achieve with higher status. If you treated everyone the same, what incentive was there for customers to pay premium prices? Diana had tried to educate Isabella, subtly pointing out which passengers required special attention and which ones could be served with standard efficiency. She had explained the importance of managing passenger expectations, of ensuring that first-class service remained exclusive and desirable. But Isabella remained stubbornly idealistic. She seemed to believe that every passenger who had paid for a first-class seat deserved first-class treatment regardless of how they looked or where they came from. Like now watching Diana handle the situation with the passenger in 1A. Isabella had actually questioned her decision about the meal service, had tried to intervene on behalf of a passenger who clearly didn't understand the standards expected in premium cabins. It was exactly the kind of bleeding heart thinking that Diana had been trying to correct. The man in 1A hadn't complained when she denied him champagne, claiming they were low on inventory. He hadn't demanded to speak to a supervisor when she informed him that the steak was unavailable. He had simply accepted her explanations with quiet dignity, as if he was accustomed to receiving substandard service, which Diana assumed he probably was. She had dealt with passengers like him before. They usually fell into one of several categories: lottery winners who didn't understand luxury travel athletes, or entertainers whose managers had booked their flights, or corporate employees flying on company expense accounts without any personal investment in the experience. Occasionally, they were what the industry called points passengers, frequent travelers who had accumulated enough airline miles to book premium seats without paying premium prices. These passengers were particularly troublesome because they felt entitled to service they hadn't truly earned. The man in 1A seemed to fit this profile perfectly. No designer luggage, no expensive watch, no signs of the kind of wealth that justified first-class treatment. He was polite enough she would give him that, but politeness didn't change the fundamental reality of who belonged in her cabin and who didn't. Isabella approached her again as Diana prepared the meal service. Her young face creased with concern. "Diana." I checked the inventory again. "We have plenty of steak meals. I think there was a miscommunication about Ms. Cruz." Diana interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut through Isabella's good intentions. "I've been doing this for 28 years. I know how to manage meal service. Please focus on your assigned duties." Isabella's face flushed, but she didn't back down. "I just think that passenger deserves the same service as everyone else. He paid for first class, just like the others." Diana studied the younger woman for a moment, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw. Isabella was from a working-class family, the first in her line to work in the airline industry. She brought a perspective that Diana found both naive and dangerous. She didn't understand the delicate social dynamics that governed premium service. She didn't grasp the importance of maintaining proper standards. "Isabella," Diana said, her voice taking on the tone she used for training new employees, "there are aspects of this job that you don't understand yet. Service isn't just about following policies. It's about reading passengers, understanding their expectations, and managing the experience for everyone on board." She gestured toward the passenger in 1A, who was reading something on his laptop, seemingly unaware of their conversation. "Some passengers require careful handling. They may not be accustomed to first-class service, and if we don't manage their expectations properly, they can become disruptive. It's kinder, ultimately, to provide them with service that matches their background and comfort level." Isabella stared at her for a long moment, and Diana could see the wheels turning in the young woman's mind. She was trying to process what Diana was really saying, to understand the coded language that experienced flight attendants use to navigate sensitive situations. "I think I understand," Isabella said finally, her voice quiet. Diana smiled, satisfied that her mentoring was finally taking effect. "Good. Now, let's focus on providing excellent service to our premium passengers." As Isabella walked away to prepare the beverage cart, Diana felt confident that she had handled the situation appropriately. She had maintained standards, protected the first-class experience, and educated a junior employee about the realities of luxury service. She had no idea that she had just created a witness to discrimination who would soon find the courage to speak up. The first-class cabin of Atlas Airlines Flight 447 was a microcosm of American wealth and privilege. 12 seats filled with 12 very different stories about success status and the complex social hierarchies that governed modern air travel. Richard Coleman occupied seat 2D, his massive frame filling the space like a declaration of ownership. At 55, he had built a real estate empire across the Southwest, specializing in luxury developments that transformed desert landscapes into exclusive communities. His navy Brioni suit cost more than most people earned in a month, and his gold Rolex caught the cabin lighting every time he gestured, which was often. Richard was the kind of passenger Diana Blackwood loved to serve, obviously wealthy, appropriately dressed, and completely comfortable with the privileges that money could buy. He had boarded with the casual confidence of someone who flew first class several times a month, nodding at Diana like she was hired help who existed solely for his convenience. Champagne immediately he had commanded upon settling into his seat, not as a request, but as an expectation. And make sure the steak is medium rare. Last time it was overcooked and I won't tolerate that again. Diana had practically glowed with approval. This was how first-class passengers were supposed to behave, demanding, entitled, absolutely certain of their right to premium treatment. It made her job easier when passengers understood their role in the luxury service ecosystem. Across the aisle from Richard, Elena Rodriguez sat quietly in seat 2F, her appearance carefully crafted to blend into the first-class environment while concealing her true purpose. At 29, she was one of the most successful freelance journalists in the country, specializing in social justice stories that exposed inequality and discrimination in unexpected places. Her 800,000 TikTok followers knew her as someone who found injustice hiding in plain sight corporate boardrooms that excluded qualified candidates' restaurants that provided different service based on customer appearance retail stores, where shopping while black meant constant surveillance. Elena had booked this flight as part of a larger investigation into bias in the travel industry. She had heard whispers about Atlas Airlines complaints from passengers who felt they had received substandard service despite paying premium prices. The airline's customer review patterns showed troubling disparities in satisfaction scores that seemed to correlate with passenger demographics rather than service quality. She wasn't looking for a story when she boarded Flight 447, but her journalistic instincts were already tingling as she watched Diana's interactions with different passengers. The warm welcome for Richard Coleman. The professional but distant greeting for the elderly white couple in row 1. The barely concealed disdain for the young man in the hoodie who had taken seat 1A. Elena's phone was charged and ready. Her followers were always hungry for content that revealed how discrimination operated in supposedly enlightened spaces. If Atlas Airlines was providing different levels of service based on passenger appearance, her audience would be very interested to see the evidence. In seat 1F, Margaret Chen was absorbed in a legal brief, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents for a case that would be argued before the Supreme Court next month. As a senior partner at one of Washington's most prestigious law firms, she was accustomed to first-class travel as both a necessity and a symbol of professional achievement. Margaret had noticed the interaction between Diana and the passenger in 1A, but she was trying to focus on her work rather than involve herself in whatever drama was unfolding across the aisle. She had learned over the years that airline service could be inconsistent, and she preferred to avoid confrontations that might delay her flight or complicate her travel experience. Still, something about the exchange bothered her. She had paid attention when Diana claimed to be out of steak, but she could clearly see multiple meal options in the galley. As someone who had built her career on identifying inconsistencies and false statements, she found Diana's explanation suspicious. Behind them, in row 3, Dr. James Patterson was already working on his laptop preparing for a medical conference in New York where he would present research on cardiac surgery innovations. At 62, he was one of the most respected surgeons in Los Angeles, someone who had performed operations on celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. Dr. Patterson had been flying first class for decades, and he had seen enough airline service to recognize quality when he experienced it. Diana had been professional and courteous when she welcomed him aboard, offering champagne and asking about his destination with genuine interest. The contrast with how she had treated the passenger in 1A was stark and troubling. Dr. Patterson prided himself on treating all his patients with equal respect, regardless of their background, and he found Diana's behavior professionally disappointing. In the window seat of row 4, tech entrepreneur Sarah Kim was live streaming to her business coaching audience, sharing insights about travel strategies for busy executives. Her 200,000 Instagram followers looked to her for advice on everything from productivity hacks to investment opportunities. Sarah had built her company from nothing, starting as a first-generation immigrant whose parents worked in a dry cleaning shop in Queens. She understood what it felt like to be underestimated, to have people assume she didn't belong in spaces of wealth and power. Watching Diana's treatment of the passenger in 1A brought back memories of her own experiences with discrimination disguised as customer service. She was already considering whether this interaction warranted documentation for her audience. The remaining passengers in first class represented a cross-section of American success: a retired judge, a pharmaceutical executive, a Broadway producer, and a venture capitalist. Each had paid thousands of dollars for the privilege of premium service, and each expected to be treated with the respect that their ticket price demanded. What they were witnessing instead was a masterclass in how bias operated in supposedly neutral service environments. As the meal service approached, tension in the cabin was building. Multiple passengers had noticed the discrepancies in Diana's treatment of the man in seat 1A. Some, like Elena, were actively documenting the situation. Others, like Dr. Patterson and Margaret Chen, were mentally preparing to intervene if the situation escalated. Richard Coleman remained oblivious, focused primarily on his own comfort, and completely unaware that his enthusiastic endorsement of Diana's preferential treatment was about to become evidence in a discrimination case. The stage was set for a confrontation that would transform not just this flight, but the entire culture of Atlas Airlines. Multiple witnesses were watching, several were recording, and one passenger was quietly taking notes for what would become the most expensive corporate transformation in aviation history. None of them knew that the man being discriminated against was about to become their boss. The champagne service began 30 minutes after takeoff, as Atlas Airlines Flight 447 reached its cruising altitude of 39,000 feet above the Colorado Rockies. Diana Blackwood emerged from the galley with a silver tray bearing crystal flutes filled with Dom Perignon, the airline's signature first-class welcome drink. Her approach was choreographed with military precision. 28 years of experience had taught her exactly how to move through the cabin, how to balance the tray while navigating the narrow aisles, how to serve champagne with the kind of graceful efficiency that made passengers feel pampered rather than processed. She began with row 4, offering the pharmaceutical executive and venture capitalist their drinks with warm smiles and brief conversations about their destinations. Then row 3, where Dr. Patterson received his champagne along with an inquiry about his conference and a comment about the beautiful weather in New York. Row 2 was Richard Coleman's domain, and Diana devoted extra attention to his service, ensuring his glass was perfectly filled and asking if he preferred his usual preference for cashews over mixed nuts. You remember, Richard beamed, accepting the champagne like a feudal lord accepting tribute. This is why I fly Atlas. Real service from professionals who care about their customers. Diana glowed under the praise. This was how the interaction was supposed to work. Appreciative passengers, personalized attention, the kind of luxury service that justified premium pricing. She moved to row 1, serving Margaret Chen with professional courtesy, and the elderly couple with the warm deference appropriate for their age and status. Then she reached seat 1A. Jonathan Rivers looked up from his laptop as Diana approached, his expression politely expectant. He had watched the service ritual unfold, noting the genuine warmth in Diana's interactions with the other passengers, the personal touches that marked truly exceptional hospitality. And then Diana walked past him. Not quickly, not obviously. She simply continued her circuit without pausing, without making eye contact, without acknowledging his presence. To a casual observer, it might have appeared to be an oversight, a minor lapse in an otherwise flawless service routine. But Jonathan had experienced this dance before. The careful choreography of exclusion, the professional invisibility that turned paying customers into ghosts in their own seats. Behind him, Elena Rodriguez was recording everything on her phone, her TikTok audience growing by the minute as word spread about the live discrimination happening on Atlas Airlines. The comments were already pouring in. "This is disgusting, sue them. Someone better get this man his champagne." Is this really happening in 2024? Diana completed her circuit and returned to the galley where Isabella Cruz was waiting with obvious confusion. "Diana," Isabella whispered, glancing toward Jonathan's seat. "You missed the passenger in 1A. Diana's expression hardened. "No, I didn't. We're running low on champagne and I need to conserve inventory for passengers who specifically requested it." Isabella looked toward the galley storage where at least 20 unopened bottles of Dom Perignon were clearly visible. "But we have—" Diana interrupted, her voice taking on the sharp edge she used when training needed to be reinforced. "I need you to understand something about inventory management. We don't serve premium beverages to passengers who might not appreciate them. It's a waste of resources and can lead to complaints if the service doesn't meet their expectations." The coded language was clear to Isabella now. Diana wasn't talking about champagne inventory or service expectations. She was talking about the black passenger in seat 1A, making assumptions about his background, his preferences, his worthiness of the service he had paid for. "I think he would appreciate it," Isabella said quietly, her voice steady despite the career risk she was taking. "He's a first-class passenger like everyone else." Diana's smile was sharp as a blade. "Ms. Cruz, you're still learning about the complexities of luxury service. Some passengers prefer different types of attention. Not everyone is comfortable with formal champagne service. I'm actually being considerate by adjusting my approach to match his background." The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, even caring. But Isabella could hear the poison underneath the assumptions about who deserved respect and who didn't. 15 minutes later, Diana returned to the cabin for a second champagne service, this time focusing on passengers who had requested refills. Richard Coleman was eager for a second glass, praising the quality of the Dom Perignon and asking Diana about the vintage. 2015, she replied warmly, one of the best years. "I always recommend it to passengers who appreciate fine champagne." As she passed Jonathan's row again, he spoke quietly. "Excuse me, could I get some champagne, please?" Diana paused, her professional smile freezing into something resembling politeness. "Of course, sir. Let me check our inventory." She disappeared into the galley for several minutes, during which time Elena's TikTok followers grew increasingly agitated. The hashtag Atlas Airlines discrimination was beginning to trend, with viewers sharing their own experiences of bias in premium service environments. When Diana returned, she was carrying a single plastic cup filled with what appeared to be the complimentary champagne served in economy class. "Here you go, sir," she said, placing the plastic cup on Jonathan's armrest with the same careful attention she had shown while serving crystal flutes to the other passengers. "I hope you enjoy it." The message was unmistakable. Even when forced to provide service, Diana was determined to make it clear that Jonathan didn't deserve the same quality as the other passengers. Jonathan accepted the plastic cup with quiet dignity, but his mental documentation was becoming more detailed. The discrimination was escalating beyond simple neglect into active humiliation, creating a paper trail that would be impossible to defend in court. Around the cabin, other passengers were beginning to notice the pattern. Dr. Patterson had stopped working on his presentation. Margaret Chen was watching over her reading glasses. Sarah Kim was discreetly recording on her phone. The airplane was becoming a courtroom with multiple witnesses documenting behavior that would soon become evidence in the most expensive discrimination case in aviation history. And the meal service hadn't even begun yet. 2 hours into the flight, as the aircraft crossed into Kansas airspace, Diana Blackwood began preparing for the signature service that Atlas Airlines used to justify its premium pricing, the first-class meal experience. Atlas had hired James Morrison, a James Beard award-winning chef, to design their first-class menu. The featured entree was a hand-cut filet mignon with truffle butter, accompanied by roasted fingerling potatoes and seasonal vegetables. The presentation was restaurant quality, served on bone china with heavy silver cutlery designed to make passengers feel like they were dining at a five-star establishment rather than in an airplane cabin. The meal service was a choreographed performance that Diana had perfected over years of practice. She would approach each passenger individually, presenting the menu options with detailed descriptions of the preparation and ingredients, taking orders with the attention of a sommelier, and ensuring that every dietary restriction and preference was accommodated. For passengers like Richard Coleman, she would spend several minutes discussing the wine pairings, the chef's preparation techniques, and the sourcing of ingredients. She made the meal service feel exclusive, personal, worthy of the premium price. But as she prepared to begin serving, Diana had already made a decision about the passenger in seat 1A. Isabella, she called to the junior flight attendant. "We need to do a quick inventory check on the meal service. Can you count the steaks in the warming compartment?" Isabella dutifully checked the galley storage. 12 steaks, Diana. Exactly what we need for first class. Are you sure? Count again. Isabella recounted, her confusion growing. 12 steaks, plus 3 salmon and 2 vegetarian options. We have enough for everyone, plus extras. Diana nodded curtly. Good. Now I need you to handle the beverage refills in economy. This will take a while. It was another dismissal, another way of removing the idealistic young woman from witnessing what was about to happen. Elena Rodriguez was live streaming again, her TikTok audience now approaching 15,000 concurrent viewers. The comments were flowing faster than she could read them, with viewers from around the world expressing outrage at what they were witnessing. Someone record this typed at Justice Warrior 23. This is evidence of civil rights violation, added at Lawyer Mom. Call the news demanded at equality now. Diana began her meal service with her usual theatrical flair, starting with Dr. Patterson in row 3. Doctor, tonight we're featuring a magnificent filet mignon, dry-aged for 28 days, and prepared with truffle butter sourced from the Périgord region of France. The chef recommends pairing it with our 2018 Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, which has notes of black cherry and espresso that complement the richness of the beef. Dr. Patterson, impressed, despite himself, nodded appreciatively. That sounds excellent. I'll have the filet mignon. The same elaborate presentation was offered to every passenger in first class. Margaret Chen selected the salmon after a detailed discussion about the preparation method. The elderly couple both chose the steak after Diana explained the aging process. Richard Coleman not only ordered the filet mignon, but also requested an additional side of the truffle butter. Of course, Mr. Coleman, Diana replied warmly. I'll make sure the chef prepares an extra portion just for you. By the time she reached row 1, 11 passengers had placed their orders. 8 had selected the filet mignon, 2 had chosen the salmon, and 1 had requested the vegetarian option. Diana's mental calculation showed 12 steaks available and 8 ordered. 4 extra steaks remained. She approached Jonathan Rivers with the professional smile she reserved for difficult situations. Sir, I'm pleased to offer you our dinner service this evening. Unfortunately, we've experienced higher than expected demand for our filet mignon, and we're currently out of that option. However, I can offer you our chicken breast, which is prepared with herbs and served with the same accompaniments. I think you'll find it quite satisfying. Jonathan looked up from his laptop, his expression unchanged. Around the cabin, several passengers turned their attention to the interaction, sensing something wrong in Diana's tone. I see, Jonathan said quietly. How many people ordered the steak before me? Diana's smile tightened. I don't discuss other passengers' orders, sir, but I can assure you that our chicken option is very popular. I'll take the steak, please, Jonathan said calmly. As I mentioned, sir, we're out of the steak option. Elena's phone was capturing everything, her TikTok audience now exploding past 25,000 viewers. The comments were becoming increasingly angry. He paid for first class. This is straight-up racism. Where is the captain? Boycott Atlas Airlines. Dr. Patterson cleared his throat from across the aisle. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. Are you saying you've run out of steak dinners?" Diana turned to face him, her professional composure beginning to crack. "Yes, doctor. We've had unexpected demand tonight." "That's strange." Dr. Patterson continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "You just told me that you had plenty available and you offered extra truffle butter to the gentleman in 2D. How exactly did you run out between taking orders?" The cabin fell silent. Even Richard Coleman paused his phone conversation to listen to the exchange. Margaret Chen removed her reading glasses, her legal mind immediately recognizing the inconsistencies in Diana's story. "Miss, I'm sorry, but this doesn't make sense. If you knew you had limited inventory, why didn't you mention it when you started taking orders?" Diana's face flushed red. She was surrounded by successful, intelligent passengers who were asking questions she couldn't answer without admitting to discrimination. "Well," she stammered, "sometimes passengers change their orders and we have to accommodate." "Nobody changed their order," interrupted Richard Coleman, and for the first time his voice carried doubt instead of entitled certainty. "You served us in order from back to front. How could you run out? Elena's followers were now sharing the live stream across social media platforms. Atlas Airlines. Discrimination was trending on Twitter with thousands of people watching the confrontation unfold in real time. But Diana had committed to her story, and she doubled down with the desperation of someone whose career was hanging in the balance. "Sir," she said, turning back to Jonathan with barely concealed hostility, "I understand your disappointment. But airline meal service involves complex logistics. The chicken option is excellent, and I'm sure you'll find it quite adequate for your needs." The word adequate hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to burn. Jonathan remained calm, but his voice carried a new edge. "Are you suggesting that I personally would find chicken more adequate than the steak that every other first-class passenger received?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes passengers need to be flexible about their expectations." "Based on what criteria do you determine which passengers need to be flexible?" Diana realized she was walking into a trap, but her anger and prejudice were overriding her professional judgment. "Based on my experience with different types of passengers and their comfort levels with various cuisine options." Dr. Patterson sat forward in his seat. "Different types of passengers. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?" Margaret Chen was taking notes, now her legal training kicking in as she documented what was clearly becoming a discrimination incident. Elena's TikTok audience had grown to over 40,000 viewers, with thousands more joining every minute. The comments were demanding action. "Someone call the airline corporate office. This is lawsuit material. Where is the manager? Fire her now." But Diana was beyond retreat now. Instead of acknowledging her mistake and attempting to salvage the situation, she decided to escalate further. "Look," she said, abandoning all pretense of professional courtesy. "This is my cabin, and I determine service standards based on my professional experience. Some passengers are more suited to certain dining options than others, and part of my job is matching service to passenger expectations." The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. "I see. And what specifically leads you to believe that I would have different expectations than the other passengers in first class?" Diana opened her mouth to respond, then realized that any answer would be an explicit admission of discrimination. She was trapped between her prejudice and her professional survival, and she had just painted herself into a corner in front of a cabin full of witnesses and a live audience of tens of thousands. But she was about to make the situation much worse, because at that moment, Isabella Cruz emerged from the economy section with a tray of first-class meals, clearly showing multiple steak dinners still available for service. And Elena Rodriguez was still recording everything. Isabella Cruz appeared from the galley carrying a serving tray that contained what looked like at least 4 perfectly prepared filet mignon dinners, the truffle butter glistening under the cabin lights, the presentation immaculate and restaurant-worthy. The timing couldn't have been worse for Diana Blackwood. 43,000 people were now watching Elena Rodriguez's live TikTok stream. The hashtag Atlas Airlines shame was trending across 3 different social media platforms, and a cabin full of educated professional passengers had just witnessed a senior flight attendant claim they were out of steak, while her colleague emerged with multiple steak dinners clearly visible. Isabella Diana called sharply, her voice cracking with panic. "What are you doing?" Isabella paused, confused by the aggressive tone. "I'm bringing the meals for first-class service. These are the steaks for—" "Those are for economy upgrade passengers," Diana interrupted quickly. "Return them to the galley immediately." Isabella's face showed her bewilderment. "Diana, these are specifically prepared for first class. The economy meals are different. These have the truffle butter and the special presentation, Ms. Cruz. I need you to follow my instructions without questioning them." But the damage was already done. Every passenger in first class had seen the steaks. Dr. Patterson was shaking his head in disgust. Margaret Chen was writing notes with the focused intensity of a prosecutor building a case. Richard Coleman was staring at Diana with the dawning realization that he had been celebrating discrimination. Elena's TikTok audience was exploding with comments. "She just got caught lying. This is evidence. Screenshot everything. Sue them for millions. I will never fly. Atlas again." Jonathan Rivers remained perfectly still, watching Diana's professional destruction unfold with the calm attention of someone who understood exactly what was happening and why. Diana realized she needed to regain control of the situation immediately. Her 28-year career, her authority in the cabin, her entire professional identity was crumbling in real time in front of a global audience. She made the decision that would end her career permanently. "Sir," she said, turning to Jonathan with barely concealed desperation, "I need to ask you to return to your assigned seat." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "I am in my assigned seat." "No, sir. I need to check your boarding pass again. There seems to be some confusion about your ticket status." The request was absurd on its face. Jonathan had been sitting in seat 1A for 3 hours. His boarding pass had been scanned at the gate checked by the captain during boarding and verified multiple times throughout the flight. Dr. Patterson stood up from his seat. "This is absolutely unacceptable. This man has been in first class since boarding. You've served him drinks terrible service, but you acknowledged his presence. Now you're questioning his right to be here. Margaret Chen's legal training was now in full operation. Ma'am, are you suggesting that this passenger is not entitled to be in first class?" Based on what evidence, Diana's face was flushed with a combination of embarrassment and anger. She was trapped in a lie of her own making, but instead of retreating, she pressed forward with the reckless determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. "I need to verify passenger credentials as part of our safety and security protocols," she announced loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Some passengers may have obtained first-class seating through irregular means, and it's my responsibility to ensure all travelers are properly accommodated." The phrase irregular means hung in the air like an accusation. Elena's followers were now sharing screenshots across every social media platform. The story was being picked up by news outlets, aviation blogs, and civil rights organizations. Atlas Airlines' stock price was beginning to drop as investors reacted to the viral discrimination incident. Isabella watched in horror as her mentor and supervisor destroyed her own career with public racism. She had spent 2 years trying to learn from Diana, respecting her experience and professionalism, believing that her senior colleague represented the best of Atlas Airlines' service standards. Now she was witnessing Diana reveal the ugly truth that had been hidden beneath years of professional courtesy and industry experience. Diana, Isabella whispered, approaching her with genuine concern. "Please stop. You're making this worse." But Diana was beyond reason now. She had convinced herself that she was protecting the airline, maintaining standards, ensuring that first-class service remained exclusive and appropriate. She reached for her tablet and began scrolling through passenger information looking for anything that might justify her treatment of Jonathan. "Sir, I show here that your ticket was purchased with frequent flyer miles rather than full payment. Mile redemption passengers are sometimes seated in available first-class seats, but may not be entitled to the complete first-class service experience. It was a complete fabrication. Jonathan had paid full price for his ticket, over $4,000 for the round-trip fare. But Diana was grasping for any explanation that might salvage her position. Margaret Chen was now openly taking notes on her legal pad. "Miss, are you saying that passengers who use frequent flyer miles receive different meal service than passengers who pay cash?" "It's a matter of inventory management and service allocation," Diana replied, sounding increasingly desperate. "We prioritize full-fare passengers for premium amenities." Dr. Patterson pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the airline customer service line right now. This is the most disgraceful display of discrimination I've ever witnessed." Richard Coleman, who had been silent since realizing his complicity in the situation, finally spoke up. "Diana, I've been flying Atlas for 15 years. I've never heard of different service levels for different types of first-class tickets. This is wrong." But Diana had reached the point of no return. Instead of acknowledging her mistake and attempting to salvage the situation, she decided to escalate further. She picked up the cabin phone and dialed the cockpit. "Captain Mitchell, this is Diana in first class. I need you to come back here. We have a passenger situation that requires your attention." Elena's TikTok audience was now over 75,000 viewers, with major news outlets beginning to monitor the stream. Atlas Airlines scandal was trending globally, and the airline's social media team was scrambling to respond to thousands of angry comments and messages. In the galley, Isabella was quietly taking photos of the meal inventory with her personal phone. 4 filet mignon dinners remained untouched, along with detailed prep sheets showing exactly which passengers had been assigned which meals. The documentation was clear there had never been a shortage of steak dinners. Diana had fabricated the entire story to justify denying service to a black passenger. Isabella made a decision that would save her career and help end Diana's. She opened her personal TikTok account, which she used to share behind-the-scenes airline life content with her 12,000 followers, and began recording a video. "Hey everyone, I'm Isabella, and I'm a flight attendant on the Atlas Airlines flight that's going viral right now. I need to show you something that my supervisor doesn't want you to see." She turned the camera toward the galley, showing the unused steak dinners, the meal prep sheets, and the service logs that proved Diana had lied about inventory. "There are 4 steak dinners left unused. My supervisor told a passenger we were out of steak, but as you can see, that's completely false. She made that up to deny service to a black passenger. This is not how Atlas Airlines is supposed to work, and I'm not going to stay silent about discrimination." Her video was immediately shared across social media platforms, providing insider confirmation of what passengers had witnessed. As Captain Mitchell made his way back from the cockpit, the cabin had transformed into something resembling a courtroom. Multiple passengers were recording. Social media was exploding with outrage. News outlets were preparing breaking news alerts, and Jonathan Rivers was still sitting quietly in seat 1A, documenting every moment of what would become the most expensive discrimination case in aviation history. Diana had no idea that she was about to face the man who could fire her with a single phone call, but she was about to find out. Captain James Mitchell entered the first-class cabin with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command authority. At 52, he had been flying commercial aircraft for 23 years, and he had dealt with passenger disputes, unruly travelers, and crew conflicts throughout his career. What he wasn't prepared for was a discrimination incident being live-streamed to a global audience while his airline's reputation burned in real time. "Diana, what seems to be the problem here?" Diana straightened, taking confidence from the captain's presence and authority. She had worked with Captain Mitchell many times over the years, and she knew he would support her professional judgment. "Captain, we have a passenger in 1A who is questioning our meal service protocols and becoming disruptive. He's demanding special accommodation that goes beyond our standard service parameters." Jonathan looked up at Captain Mitchell with the same calm expression he had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. "Captain, I simply requested the steak dinner that was offered to every other passenger in first class. I was told you were out of steak, but as you can see," he gestured toward Isabella, who was still holding the tray with the remaining dinners, "that appears to be incorrect." Captain Mitchell's expression grew serious as he assessed the situation. The cabin was tense. Passengers were obviously upset, and he could see phones recording the interaction. "Diana, do we have steak dinners available?" "Captain, we have limited inventory, and I was managing service allocation based on passenger profiles and—" "That's a yes or no question, Diana. Do we have steak dinners available?" Isabella stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "Captain, we have 4 steak dinners remaining. There was never a shortage. I can show you the prep sheets." Captain Mitchell's face darkened as he realized what had happened. He had been called to resolve what Diana had described as a passenger problem, but he was looking at an employee problem, a discrimination problem, a problem that was being broadcast live to tens of thousands of viewers. "Sir," he said, turning to Jonathan, "I apologize for this confusion. We absolutely have steak dinners available, and I'll personally ensure you receive the meal you ordered." Diana's face went pale. "Captain, I was following established protocols for Diana. There is no protocol for denying meal service to passengers based on their appearance. And if you believe there is, we need to have a serious conversation about your understanding of our company policies." Elena's TikTok audience was approaching 100,000 viewers. The comments were moving too fast to read, but the sentiment was clear. Atlas Airlines was being exposed for something that should have been unthinkable in 2024. But Diana made one final catastrophic mistake. "Captain, I've been doing this job for 28 years. I know how to provide appropriate service to different types of passengers. Some travelers are more comfortable with simplified options, and I was being considerate of this passenger's background." The words "different types of passengers" and "background" hung in the air like a confession. Captain Mitchell stared at her for a long moment, realizing that his senior flight attendant had just made explicitly racist statements in front of a cabin full of witnesses and a global online audience. "Diana, you're relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Report to the galley and remain there until we land." But it was too late. The damage was done. Diana's career was over. Atlas Airlines was facing a civil rights crisis, and Jonathan Rivers was about to reveal exactly who he was and what he intended to do about it. Captain Mitchell's attempted damage control had come too late to contain the catastrophe that Diana Blackwood had created. As he returned to the cockpit to radio Atlas Airlines headquarters about the situation, social media was exploding with outrage that reached far beyond Elena Rodriguez's TikTok stream. Atlas Airlines racism was now trending globally. Major news outlets were monitoring the situation. Civil rights organizations were issuing statements. The airline's customer service phone lines were overwhelmed with complaints and cancellation requests. But Diana wasn't finished destroying her career. Confined to the galley, humiliated in front of passengers and crew facing the end of her 28-year career, she made the decision to go down fighting. If Atlas Airlines wanted to sacrifice her to protect a passenger who didn't deserve first-class service, she would make sure everyone understood what was really happening. She picked up the galley phone and dialed the cockpit again. "Captain Mitchell, I need to report additional safety concerns about the passenger in 1A. Captain Mitchell's voice came through the speaker with barely concealed frustration. "Diana, I thought I made myself clear. You're relieved of passenger service duties." "Sir, this goes beyond meal service. I believe this passenger may be under the influence of alcohol or controlled substances. His behavior has been erratic and confrontational throughout the flight. He's been taking pictures of crew members and making other passengers uncomfortable. The accusation was completely fabricated. Jonathan had been nothing but polite throughout the flight, never raising his voice, never threatening anyone, never displaying any behavior that could be construed as problematic. But Diana was invoking the magic words that could justify any level of intervention's safety and security. Isabella heard the phone call and stared at Diana in horror. She had watched Jonathan's behavior throughout the flight. He had been calm, professional, and dignified even while being discriminated against. Diana's accusations were not just false, they were malicious. "Diana, that's not true," Isabella whispered. "He hasn't done anything wrong. Ms. Cruz, you're young and inexperienced. You don't recognize the signs of passenger intoxication or aggressive behavior. This is exactly the kind of situation that can escalate into a serious safety incident if we don't intervene appropriately." Isabella realized that Diana was creating a false narrative that could justify anything restraints, arrest, criminal charges. She was trying to destroy an innocent passenger to cover up her own discrimination. Isabella made the most important decision of her young career. She pulled out her phone and began recording Diana's phone call to the captain. Elena's TikTok audience watched in real time as the situation escalated from meal service discrimination to false accusations of criminal behavior. The comments were becoming increasingly angry. "This is insane. She's lying to destroy him. Someone stop her. This is how innocent people get arrested." In the cockpit, Captain Mitchell was torn between supporting his crew and protecting his airline from further damage. Diana was a senior employee with nearly 3 decades of experience. If she was reporting safety concerns, he had to take them seriously. But he had watched the interaction himself. The passenger in 1A had been calm and professional throughout. There had been no signs of intoxication, no threatening behavior, no valid safety concerns. Still, FAA regulations required him to investigate any crew report of passenger misconduct. "Diana, I need specific details about the safety concerns you're reporting." Diana's voice came through the speaker with the practiced authority of someone who had learned to manipulate regulations to serve her purposes. "Captain, the passenger has been taking unauthorized photographs of crew members, which is a violation of federal aviation security regulations. He has been argumentative about service protocols, suggesting that our policies are discriminatory, and his behavior shows signs of possible substance influence, dilated pupils, slow responses, unusual calmness in stressful situations." Every word was either false or a gross distortion of Jonathan's professional behavior. Margaret Chen, listening to the conversation from her seat, was taking detailed notes. As a Supreme Court litigator, she recognized character assassination when she heard it. Dr. Patterson was openly recording the phone call on his smartphone, documenting Diana's false accusations for potential legal proceedings. Richard Coleman was no longer confused about what was happening. He was witnessing a senior flight attendant fabricate criminal charges against a passenger who had committed no crime other than existing while black in first class. Captain Mitchell made the decision that would end his own career alongside Diana's. Instead of investigating the claims or asking for evidence, he chose to support his crew member and protect what he saw as airline authority. "Diana, I'll contact air traffic control about the situation. If this passenger is indeed a security risk, we may need to arrange for law enforcement to meet the aircraft." Elena's TikTok audience exploded past 150,000 viewers. The live stream was being shared across every social media platform, picked up by news outlets, and monitored by federal aviation authorities. But the most important person watching wasn't online at all. Jonathan Rivers was listening to every word of Diana's false report, and his mental documentation was becoming a federal case file. As the CEO of Pinnacle Aviation Holdings and the new owner of Atlas Airlines, he had legal authority to access crew records, incident reports, and communication logs. Diana's false accusations were creating evidence of criminal conspiracy and civil rights violations. But more than that, they were revealing a culture of impunity that had allowed discrimination to flourish for years. Jonathan quietly opened his laptop and began typing an email to Paul Henderson, Atlas Airlines HR Director, and Linda Zhang, the airline's chief legal counsel. Paul and Linda, he wrote, I am currently aboard Atlas Flight 447, experiencing active discrimination, and now false accusations from senior crew members. The incident is being live-streamed and has created significant legal and public relations exposure for the company. I need immediate intervention from corporate security and legal teams. The crew members involved require immediate suspension pending investigation. This is not a request, it's a directive from ownership. I will provide detailed incident reports upon landing, but preliminary evidence suggests widespread cultural issues that require complete policy overhaul. He attached his Pinnacle Aviation Holdings CEO credentials to the email and sent it with the highest priority flag. Within minutes, his phone began buzzing with calls from Atlas executives who had just realized that their new owner was the target of a discrimination incident being broadcast to hundreds of thousands of viewers. But Jonathan didn't answer the calls. He wanted the situation to play out completely to document every aspect of how Atlas Airlines handled discrimination complaints, how crew members protected each other when caught in wrongdoing, and how the airline's culture enabled and encouraged bias against passengers. Diana's false accusations were about to backfire in the most spectacular way imaginable. In the galley, Isabella was still recording Diana's phone calls and documenting the false accusations being made against an innocent passenger. Diana, she said quietly, you know this is wrong. You know he didn't do anything. Diana turned on her with the fury of someone whose world was collapsing. Miss Cruz, you have no idea what you're talking about. I've been protecting this airline and its passengers from people like him for 28 years. If you can't understand that maybe you don't belong in this industry. People like him. Isabella repeated, her voice carrying a new strength. You mean black people. You mean passengers who don't dress the way you think they should. You mean people who expect the service they paid for. Diana's face contorted with rage. I mean passengers who don't understand their place, who make demands above their station, who think they can intimidate crew members into special treatment. Isabella's recording captured every word of what would become Exhibit A in the discrimination lawsuit that would ultimately cost Atlas Airlines over $50 million in settlements and transformation costs. Captain Mitchell's voice came over the cabin intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a passenger disturbance in the first-class cabin, we may experience some delays in our service routine. We appreciate your patience as our crew addresses this situation. The announcement was Diana's final victory. She had successfully portrayed herself as the victim of passenger aggression rather than the perpetrator of discrimination. Elena's audience was now approaching 200,000 viewers, with major news networks beginning to carry the story live. Civil rights attorneys were reaching out through social media, offering to represent Jonathan pro bono. Aviation safety experts were commenting on the inappropriate use of security protocols to cover up discrimination. But none of them knew that the man being falsely accused was about to fire everyone involved. Jonathan closed his laptop and looked around the cabin at the passengers who had witnessed the entire incident. Dr. Patterson caught his eye and nodded with obvious support. Margaret Chen gave him a subtle thumbs up. Elena continued recording, documenting everything for the world to see. Richard Coleman, who had started the flight as an enthusiastic supporter of Diana's discriminatory service, was now visibly ashamed of his earlier complicity. In less than 2 hours, Atlas Flight 447 would land at JFK International Airport. Federal authorities would be waiting to investigate Diana's false accusations. News crews would be positioned to capture the story that had captivated hundreds of thousands of viewers. And Jonathan Rivers would walk off the aircraft as the owner of the airline, ready to transform an entire company culture and ensure that no passenger would ever again experience what he had endured. Diana Blackwood had just destroyed the career she had spent 28 years building, but the consequences were only beginning. As Atlas Airlines Flight 447 continued its eastward journey above the American heartland, the ripple effects of Diana Blackwood's discrimination were spreading far beyond the aircraft's aluminum walls. Elena Rodriguez's TikTok livestream had become a global phenomenon, with viewers from 6 continents watching the unfolding drama in real time. The hashtag Atlas Airlines crisis was trending on Twitter alongside Justice for Jonathan, despite the fact that most viewers still didn't know the victim's name. Screenshots from the live stream were being shared millions of times across social platforms, and major news outlets were scrambling to contact Atlas Airlines for official statements. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a typical first-class flight experience had transformed into something resembling a courtroom, with passengers becoming witnesses, advocates, and documentarians of a civil rights incident unfolding in real time. Dr. James Patterson had abandoned any pretense of working on his medical conference presentation. Instead, he was using his professional authority to support Jonathan while documenting Diana's behavior for potential legal proceedings. "Sir," he said, speaking directly to Jonathan, "I want you to know that every medical professional aboard this aircraft witnessed what just happened. If you need expert testimony about your demeanor, behavior, and obvious sobriety, you'll have it." Margaret Chen looked up from her legal notes, which had grown to several pages of detailed observations. "Dr. Patterson is absolutely right. As an attorney who has argued before the Supreme Court, I can tell you that what we've witnessed constitutes clear civil rights violations. The false accusations make this a potential criminal matter as well." Their public support was creating a protective barrier around Jonathan, making it clear that any further accusations from Diana would have to contend with highly credible professional witnesses. Richard Coleman, meanwhile, was experiencing something approaching a moral crisis. His enthusiastic support for Diana's preferential treatment had made him complicit in discrimination, and he was grappling with the uncomfortable realization that his privilege had blinded him to obvious injustice. "Look," he said, approaching Jonathan's seat with obvious discomfort. "I need to apologize. I was so focused on getting good service for myself that I didn't pay attention to how you were being treated. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Jonathan accepted the apology with grace, but his expression remained serious. "Thank you for saying that. But the real question is what you'll do the next time you see discrimination happening to someone else." Richard nodded, chastened. "You're right. I'll speak up. I should have spoken up today." Elena's audience was now watching not just discrimination, but the aftermath, how witnesses responded, how accountability developed, how a community of strangers began demanding justice for someone they had never met. The comments on her stream were becoming a real-time civics lesson. This is how allies should act. Finally, someone with privilege speaking up. More people need to be like Dr. Patterson. The lawyer lady is taking notes like a boss. But the most important observer in the cabin was Isabella Cruz, who was experiencing a crash course in the moral complexities of workplace loyalty versus ethical responsibility. Diana had been her mentor, the experienced professional who had guided her through the intricacies of luxury airline service. Isabella had respected Diana's expertise, trusted her judgment, and followed her guidance about managing different types of passengers. Now she was realizing that those management techniques were actually discrimination protocols designed to provide inferior service to passengers based on their race and appearance. The revelation was devastating. How many passengers had received substandard service because of Diana's coaching? How many times had Isabella unknowingly participated in discrimination because she trusted her supervisor's experience? She pulled out her personal phone and began scrolling through her social media, looking at the explosion of coverage about the incident she was witnessing firsthand. The top comment on Elena's TikTok stream caught her attention. The young flight attendant looks horrified. She knows this is wrong but doesn't know what to do. Someone help her find her courage. Isabella realized that hundreds of thousands of people were watching her moral struggle, waiting to see whether she would continue following Diana's lead or find the strength to do what was right. She made a decision that would define the rest of her career. Isabella approached Jonathan's seat, her voice shaking but determined. "Sir, I need to apologize to you personally. I was trained to follow my supervisor's guidance and I didn't speak up when I should have. But I want you to know that I've been documenting everything, and I will testify on your behalf if this goes to court." She turned toward Elena's camera, speaking directly to the global audience. "My name is Isabella Cruz, and I'm a flight attendant for Atlas Airlines. What you've witnessed today is not consistent with our company's stated values or policies. This is discrimination, and it's wrong, and I will not stay silent about it." Elena's audience exploded with support. Isabella is a hero. Finally, someone with courage. "Promote this woman. She just saved her own career." But Diana's voice cut through the cabin from the galley sharp with betrayal and fury. "Cruz, you are violating company policy by discussing internal airline operations with passengers. You are also creating a hostile work environment and undermining crew authority during flight operations." Diana was trying to use company regulations to silence the witness to her discrimination, but her effort backfired spectacularly. Dr. Patterson stood up, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "Ma'am, the only hostile environment on this aircraft was created by your discrimination against this passenger. Ms. Cruz is showing the kind of professional integrity that your airline should value." Margaret Chen added her legal perspective. Using company policy to silence witnesses to discrimination is itself a form of retaliation which is federally prohibited. Elena's followers were watching Atlas Airlines employees publicly contradict each other about company policy, creating even more evidence of institutional confusion about civil rights compliance. But the most damaging revelation was still to come. As Isabella continued documenting the incident on her phone, she discovered something in Diana's training materials that would destroy any remaining credibility the senior flight attendant might have had. Hidden in Diana's tablet, disguised as service optimization notes, was a detailed guide to providing different levels of service based on passenger profiling. The document included code words for identifying low-priority passengers, techniques for providing minimal service without appearing obviously discriminatory, and strategies for managing complaints from passengers who don't understand luxury service protocols. It was a roadmap for discrimination refined over years of practice and designed to avoid detection by airline management. Isabella realized she was holding evidence of institutional bias that went far beyond this single incident. Diana hadn't improvised her treatment of Jonathan. She had followed a carefully developed protocol for discriminating against passengers who didn't meet her standards for first-class treatment. Isabella called out, knowing that the journalist's camera was still recording. "I need to show your audience something that explains what really happened here today." She held up Diana's tablet, displaying the discriminatory guidelines for all to see. "This document shows that what happened to this passenger wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was deliberate, calculated discrimination based on written protocols that my supervisor developed over years of practice." Elena zoomed in on the tablet screen, capturing images of the discriminatory guidelines that would become central evidence in the federal investigation that was already beginning. Diana's voice from the galley was no longer angry, it was panicked. "Isabella, you are violating federal privacy laws by displaying confidential company documents. You are also breaching your employment contract and creating serious legal liability for yourself." But Isabella had found her courage now supported by passengers who were cheering her decision to expose the truth. "I would rather lose my job than stay silent about discrimination," she said, speaking to Elena's camera. "This passenger deserved better, and every passenger who was discriminated against before him deserved better." Dr. Patterson began applauding, followed by Margaret Chen, then Richard Coleman, then every other passenger in first class. They were cheering not just for Isabella's courage, but for the moral clarity that discrimination demanded. Elena's TikTok audience was witnessing something unprecedented: airline employees publicly exposing their company's discriminatory practices while still aboard a company aircraft supported by passengers who refused to remain silent about injustice. The story was becoming bigger than airline discrimination. It was becoming a real-time lesson in moral courage, institutional accountability, and the power of witnesses to demand justice. And Jonathan Rivers was documenting every moment, building the case that would transform Atlas Airlines from a company that enabled discrimination into an industry leader in civil rights compliance. But first, he had to reveal exactly who he was and what power he held to make those changes happen. As Atlas Airlines Flight 447 entered its final hour before descent into JFK, the psychological pressure inside the first-class cabin had reached a breaking point. Diana Blackwood was trapped in the galley, her 28-year career destroyed by her own discriminatory actions, while Elena Rodriguez's TikTok livestream had become a global phenomenon with over 300,000 concurrent viewers watching the drama unfold in real time. But Jonathan Rivers had remained calm throughout the entire ordeal, displaying a level of composure that was beginning to make Diana question whether she had misread the situation entirely. Most passengers facing discrimination, false accusations, and public humiliation would have become angry, defensive, or emotionally reactive. Jonathan had responded to every escalation with professional grace, as if he was accustomed to handling crises that would devastate most people. Diana couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was wrong with her assessment of the man in seat 1A. Her first hint came when Jonathan made a quiet phone call, speaking in the kind of technical aviation language that most passengers wouldn't understand. "Yes, I'm aware of the situation," she heard him say. "The crew protocols appear to be inconsistent with federal compliance standards. We'll need a complete review of training procedures once I'm on the ground. No, I don't want any intervention during the flight. I need to see how this plays out naturally. Document everything for the post-incident analysis." Diana paused, her angry pacing in the galley. The language Jonathan was using sounded like someone with deep aviation industry knowledge, not a casual traveler who had lucked into first class. Isabella noticed Diana's sudden attention to Jonathan's phone call and moved closer to listen. Jonathan continued speaking, his voice carrying the authority of someone giving directives rather than making requests. "Make sure legal is prepared for federal scrutiny. This incident will likely trigger DOT investigation, and we need to be proactive about compliance measures. Yes, I understand the media implications, but we need to focus on institutional reform rather than damage control." The pronoun "we" caught Diana's attention immediately. Jonathan was speaking as if he had authority within the aviation industry, as if this incident was somehow his responsibility to address. Dr. Patterson had also heard portions of the conversation and was looking at Jonathan with new curiosity. The medical professional in him recognized the calm competence of someone who dealt with high-stakes situations regularly. Margaret Chen glanced up from her legal notes, her attorney's instincts picking up on the shift in dynamics. Jonathan's demeanor reminded her of corporate executives. She had worked with people who wielded significant authority but didn't need to advertise it. Elena's TikTok audience was beginning to speculate in the comments. "He talks like he works in aviation. That's not how regular passengers sound. Who is this guy? Something's about to happen." But Diana was experiencing something approaching panic as she realized that her assumptions about Jonathan might have been catastrophically wrong. She had spent 28 years developing her ability to read passengers, to identify their social status and economic class through visual cues. Her entire career had been built on the premise that appearance indicated worthiness, that casual dress meant inferior status. What if she had been wrong about everything? Diana began searching through Atlas Airlines' internal passenger database on her tablet, looking for more information about the passenger in seat 1A. The basic booking information showed Jonathan Rivers paid first-class fare, frequent flyer number indicating significant travel history with multiple airlines. But when she tried to access his passenger profile for more details, She encountered something she had never seen before, a security restriction that required executive-level authorization to view complete records. Why would a casual passenger have protected profile information? Diana's hands were shaking as she tried different access methods, growing more desperate as she realized that Jonathan Rivers wasn't just any passenger. He was someone important enough to warrant special privacy protections. Isabella watched Diana's increasingly frantic tablet searches with growing understanding. Her supervisor, who had been so confident about her passenger assessment abilities, was discovering that she had badly misjudged the situation. Isabella whispered, "What are you finding? I can't. The system won't let me." Diana's voice was breaking as her worldview crumbled in real time. Jonathan made another phone call this time, speaking even more directly about airline operations. "Paul, I need you to review all crew training materials for civil rights compliance. Based on what I've observed today, we have some serious institutional issues that require immediate attention. No, I want to handle this personally when I land. This isn't just a customer service problem, it's a culture problem." Diana's blood ran cold. Jonathan was speaking to someone named Paul about airline training materials and culture problems. He was speaking as if he had the authority to order reviews of company policies. She thought about Paul Henderson, Atlas Airlines HR director, and felt a chill of recognition. Richard Coleman had been eavesdropping on Jonathan's conversations as well, and his business instincts were telling him that he had seriously underestimated the man Diana had discriminated against. "Excuse me," Richard said, approaching Jonathan's seat with obvious nervousness. "I couldn't help overhearing your calls. You sound like you work in the airline industry." Jonathan looked up with a slight smile. "You could say that. What do you do, if you don't mind me asking?" Jonathan's response was carefully measured. "I'm in the aviation business. I focus on operational improvements and cultural transformation." The phrase cultural transformation hung in the air like a prediction. Elena's audience was now over 350,000 viewers, with major news networks monitoring the stream and preparing breaking news coverage. The speculation about Jonathan's identity was reaching fever pitch. He's definitely industry insider. Cultural transformation equals he's management. Plot twist incoming. Diana is about to find out who she messed with. Dr. Patterson had been thinking about Jonathan's calm professionalism throughout the incident, and he decided to ask the question that everyone was wondering. "Sir, I have to ask, are you someone important in the aviation industry? Your reaction to this whole situation has been remarkably composed." Jonathan considered the question for a moment, then provided an answer that would make Diana's situation infinitely worse. Dr. Patterson: "I believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their position or authority. What's happened today would be wrong whether I was the most important person in aviation or someone flying for the first time." He paused, letting the moral weight of his statement settle over the cabin. "But since you asked directly, I will say that I'm in a position to ensure that this kind of discrimination never happens again on this airline." The words "this airline" carried implications that Diana was just beginning to understand. Isabella heard Jonathan's statement and felt a chill of recognition. She had been working for Atlas Airlines for 2 years, and she had heard rumors about the recent acquisition by Pinnacle Aviation Holdings. She had also heard that the new ownership was planning to conduct undercover assessments of service quality and company culture. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Jonathan Rivers might be connected to the new ownership of Atlas Airlines. If that was true, then Diana hadn't just discriminated against a random passenger, she had discriminated against someone who could fire her with a phone call. Isabella pulled out her phone and began searching for information about Pinnacle Aviation Holdings and its CEO. What she found would confirm her worst fears and Diana's complete professional destruction. The search results showed Jonathan Rivers, founder and CEO of Pinnacle Aviation Holdings, which had acquired Atlas Airlines for $3.7 billion just 72 hours ago. The man Diana had denied meal service to, made false accusations against, and treated with open racism, was the owner of Atlas Airlines. Isabella stared at her phone screen in shock, then looked toward the galley where Diana was still frantically searching for information about her passenger. Elena's TikTok audience was about to witness the most spectacular reversal of fortune in aviation history. And Jonathan Rivers was ready to reveal exactly what that would mean for everyone involved. Isabella Cruz's discovery felt like lightning striking the aircraft. Her hands trembling, she stared at the Google search results showing Jonathan Rivers, CEO of Pinnacle Aviation Holdings, which had acquired Atlas Airlines for $3.7 billion 3 days ago. The man Diana had discriminated against wasn't just any passenger. He was the owner of Atlas Airlines. Isabella looked across the cabin at Jonathan, who was still seated calmly in 1A, and then toward the galley where Diana continued her panicked tablet searches. The gap between what Diana thought she knew and the devastating reality was about to destroy everything. Elena's TikTok audience had swollen to over 400,000 viewers, with major news outlets now carrying the story live. The comments were exploding with speculation, but none of the viewers knew they were about to witness the most dramatic power reversal in aviation history. Isabella made a decision that would save her career and end Diana's permanently. She approached Jonathan's seat, her voice barely a whisper but loud enough for Elena's camera to capture. "Mr. Rivers," she said, using his name for the first time, "I know who you are now." Jonathan looked up with a slight smile that confirmed everything. I wondered when someone would figure it out. The impact of Isabella's words rippled through the first-class cabin like a shockwave. Dr. Patterson's eyes widened. Margaret Chen looked up from her legal notes with sudden understanding. Richard Coleman's mouth fell open. Elena's camera captured the moment of recognition, and her TikTok audience erupted. "He's the owner. Diana is so fired. This is incredible. She discriminated against her boss." In the galley, Diana heard Isabella use Jonathan's full name and felt her world tilt off its axis. She knew that name. Everyone in the airline industry knew that name. Jonathan Rivers, CEO of Pinnacle Aviation Holdings. The man who had just bought her airline. The man she had denied meal service to, made false accusations against, and treated with contempt was her ultimate boss. Diana's tablet slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered to the galley floor, the sound marking the end of her 28-year career with Atlas Airlines. Jonathan stood up from his seat for the first time since the meal service began, and his movement commanded the attention of every person in the cabin. He was no longer just a passenger who had been discriminated against. He was the owner of Atlas Airlines, and he had just witnessed firsthand exactly what was wrong with the company he had purchased. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had just made a decision that would transform an entire airline. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan said, addressing both the passengers and Elena's global audience, "I think it's time we had a conversation about accountability." The silence that followed Jonathan Rivers' statement was absolute. Even the steady hum of the aircraft engines seemed to fade as every person in the first-class cabin processed the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Jonathan reached into his laptop bag and withdrew a leather portfolio embossed with the Pinnacle Aviation Holdings logo. He opened it carefully, revealing corporate identification acquisition documents and a letter of authorization signed by Atlas Airlines Board of Directors. "My name is Jonathan Rivers," he said, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "I am the founder and CEO of Pinnacle Aviation Holdings. As of 72 hours ago, I am the owner of Atlas Airlines." He turned the documents toward Elena's camera, ensuring that her 450,000 viewers could see the official proof of his identity and authority. "I purchased this airline because I believe in the potential of American aviation to provide excellent service to all passengers, regardless of their appearance, background, or race. What I experience today represents everything that needs to change about airline culture." Diana Blackwood emerged from the galley like a ghost, her face chalk white, her professional composure completely shattered. She moved with the unsteady gait of someone whose entire world had just collapsed. She had denied meal service to the owner of her airline, made false accusations against her ultimate boss, spent 28 years building discriminatory protocols that she had just demonstrated to a global audience while discriminating against the one person who could fire her with a phone call. "Mr. Rivers," Diana whispered, her voice breaking. I had no idea." Jonathan's expression remained calm, but his words carried the weight of judgment. "Ms. Blackwood, the problem isn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is that you treated me differently based on your assumptions about who I should be." He gestured toward the other passengers who were watching the confrontation with fascination and horror. Every person in this cabin paid for first-class service. Every person deserved to be treated with respect. What you demonstrated today was a pattern of discrimination that has no place in modern aviation. Elena's TikTok audience was witnessing something unprecedented, a CEO confronting discrimination in his own company while the entire world watched. The comments were moving too fast to read, but the sentiment was clear. This was justice being served in real time. Dr. Patterson stood up, his medical authority lending weight to his words. "Mr. Rivers, I want to say that your composure throughout this entire ordeal has been remarkable. You conducted yourself with dignity while being subjected to treatment that was both unprofessional and illegal." Margaret Chen added her legal perspective. "As an attorney, I can tell you that what we witnessed today constitutes clear violations of federal civil rights law. The false accusations made it even worse." Richard Coleman approached Jonathan with obvious shame. "Sir, I owe you a personal apology. I was complicit in this discrimination because I benefited from preferential treatment while you were being denied basic service. That was wrong." Jonathan accepted the apologies with grace, but his focus remained on the larger implications of what had occurred. "The individual actions we witnessed today are symptoms of a cultural problem that affects this entire airline. My goal isn't to punish individual employees, but to transform the culture that made this behavior possible." Isabella Cruz stepped forward, her young voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "Mr. Rivers, I want to apologize for not speaking up sooner. I was trained to follow Diana's guidance, but I should have recognized that guidance was wrong. I have documentation of discriminatory training materials that I believe you should see." She handed him Diana's tablet, which contained the coded protocols for providing different service levels based on passenger profiling. Jonathan examined the documents with the focused attention of someone who understood their legal and operational significance. What he was looking at wasn't just evidence of discrimination, it was proof of institutional bias that had been refined and implemented over years. "These training materials," he said, holding up the tablet for the cabin and Elena's camera to see, "show that today's incident wasn't isolated. This was standard operating procedure disguised as service optimization." He turned to Diana, who was still standing frozen in the aisle. "Ms. Blackwood, these documents show that you've been implementing discriminatory service protocols throughout your career. This isn't about a single mistake. This is about a pattern of bias that has affected countless passengers." Diana tried to speak, but only a strangled sound emerged. Her career, her reputation, her entire professional identity was being dismantled in front of hundreds of thousands of viewers. Captain Mitchell's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are beginning our descent into New York. Please return to your seats and prepare for landing." But the business of the flight was irrelevant now. What was happening in first class was bigger than airline operations. It was a reckoning with discrimination that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. Jonathan returned to his seat, but his message to Diana was clear. "Ms. Blackwood, when we land, you will find representatives from Atlas Airlines Legal Department, Federal Aviation Authorities, and the Department of Transportation waiting to interview you about your actions today. Your employment with Atlas Airlines is terminated effective immediately." The words carried the finality of a judge's sentence. Elena's audience was witnessing the most dramatic corporate confrontation in aviation history. A CEO who had experienced discrimination firsthand was now using his authority to ensure it never happened again. But Jonathan wasn't finished. He turned to Isabella, whose courage in documenting Diana's behavior had provided crucial evidence for the case. "Ms. Cruz, your willingness to speak up about discrimination even when it endangered your career shows exactly the kind of integrity that Atlas Airlines needs in its leadership. When we land, I'd like to discuss a promotion to our corporate training department." Isabella's eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. She had risked everything to do what was right, and instead of being punished, she was being rewarded. Diana watched her mentee receive a promotion while her own career burned around her. The irony was crushing. The young woman she had tried to silence was now being elevated to help transform the very culture Diana had spent decades building. As Atlas Airlines Flight 447 began its final descent toward JFK International Airport, Elena Rodriguez was still live-streaming to a global audience that had grown to over 500,000 viewers. The story had become bigger than airline discrimination. It had become a real-time demonstration of how courage, documentation, and accountability could transform institutional bias. And Jonathan Rivers had just proven that the best revenge against discrimination wasn't anger, it was ownership. The final 30 minutes of Atlas Airlines Flight 447 transformed the aircraft into an impromptu courtroom of public opinion, with 500,000 people watching justice unfold in real time through Elena Rodriguez's TikTok stream. Jonathan Rivers wasn't finished addressing the discrimination he had experienced. As the new owner of Atlas Airlines, he had the authority to implement immediate consequences, and he intended to use that power to send a message that would reverberate throughout the aviation industry. "Miss Blackwood," Jonathan said, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone delivering a verdict, "your actions today violated federal civil rights law, Atlas Airlines company policy, and basic human decency. But more importantly, they revealed a pattern of institutional bias that has damaged this airline's reputation and harmed countless passengers." Diana stood in the aisle like a defendant awaiting sentencing, her 28-year career reduced to this moment of public accountability. "Your employment with Atlas Airlines is terminated effective immediately," Jonathan continued. "You will be escorted off this aircraft by federal authorities and banned from all Atlas Airlines property pending investigation by the Department of Transportation." Elena's audience erupted in digital celebration. Justice served. Finally. Accountability. This is how you handle discrimination. Never thought I'd see this happen live. But Jonathan's focus extended beyond individual punishment to cultural transformation. He turned to address the other passengers, speaking both to them and to the global audience watching through social media. What happened today wasn't just about one employee's bias. It was about a culture that enabled discrimination to flourish unchecked. That culture ends now. He looked toward the cockpit where Captain Mitchell had been monitoring the situation. "Captain Mitchell, your decision to support false accusations without investigation showed a failure of leadership that contributed to this incident. You're suspended pending review by our ethics committee." The captain's voice came over the intercom, strained but professional. "Understood, Mr. Rivers." Jonathan then turned his attention to Isabella Cruz, whose courage in documenting discrimination had provided the evidence needed to hold Diana accountable. "Ms. Cruz, your willingness to speak up despite career risk shows exactly the kind of moral leadership that Atlas Airlines needs. I'm immediately promoting you to Director of Service Excellence, where you'll help design new training programs that prevent discrimination and protect passengers' rights." Isabella's tears of gratitude were captured by Elena's camera, showing a young woman whose courage had been rewarded with career advancement. Dr. Patterson stood up to address both Jonathan and the global audience. As a physician, I've taken an oath to treat all patients equally regardless of their background. What I witnessed today was Mr. Rivers living that same principle under pressure. He never raised his voice, never threatened anyone, never lost his composure. He simply demanded the respect that every human being deserves. Margaret Chen added her legal perspective. As someone who has argued civil rights cases before the Supreme Court, I can tell you that Mr. Rivers's response to discrimination represents exactly how institutional change happens through documentation, courage, and accountability. Richard Coleman's contribution was perhaps the most powerful because of his earlier complicity. "I need to be honest with everyone watching," he said, speaking directly to Elena's camera. "I saw the discrimination happening, and I didn't just stay silent. I actively supported it because I was getting better service. That makes me complicit, and I'm ashamed of that. Mr. Rivers has shown all of us what real leadership looks like." Elena's followers were witnessing something unprecedented: passengers taking responsibility for their roles in enabling discrimination, while celebrating the courage of those who fought against it. But the most dramatic moment came when Diana made one final desperate attempt to save her career. "Mr. Rivers," she said, her voice breaking, "I've served this airline for 28 years. I've been professional and dedicated throughout my career. This incident was a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. The response came not from Jonathan, but from Isabella, who had found her voice and was no longer intimidated by her former supervisor. Diana, this wasn't a misunderstanding. You denied service to a black passenger based on his appearance, fabricated lies about inventory shortages, made false accusations about his behavior, and then tried to silence me when I documented your discrimination. That's not professionalism, that's racism." Isabella's words carried the power of someone who had witnessed the discrimination firsthand and refused to let it be minimized or explained away. Elena's audience was watching a young Latina woman courageously confronting her former supervisor's racism while being supported by the CEO of the airline. "Isabella is right," Jonathan said. "Ms. Blackwood, what you demonstrated today wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the application of discriminatory protocols you've refined over decades. The training materials we found prove that this behavior was deliberate and widespread." He turned to address Elena's camera, directly speaking to the global audience. "To everyone watching this, I want you to understand something important. Discrimination thrives in silence, but it dies in the light of accountability. What happened today will never happen again on Atlas Airlines, because we're committing to transparency training and zero tolerance for bias." The aircraft was now beginning its final approach to JFK, but the conversation was becoming a public commitment to institutional change. "When we land," Jonathan continued, "Atlas, airlines will implement the most comprehensive anti-discrimination training program in aviation history. We'll create anonymous reporting systems for passengers who experience bias. We'll conduct regular undercover assessments of service quality. And we'll hold every employee accountable for treating every passenger with respect." Elena's followers were witnessing something extraordinary: a CEO using a discrimination incident as the catalyst for transforming an entire corporate culture in real time. As the aircraft touched down at JFK International Airport, federal authorities were waiting to escort Diana off the plane. News crews were positioned to capture the story that had captivated hundreds of thousands of viewers worldwide. But the most important outcome wasn't the individual consequences. It was the institutional change that would prevent future discrimination. Isabella, promoted from flight attendant to director of service excellence in the span of a single flight, would help design training programs that protected passengers' civil rights while maintaining Atlas Airlines' commitment to premium service. Dr. Patterson, Margaret Chen, and Richard Coleman would serve as witnesses in the federal investigation that would result in new aviation industry standards for preventing discrimination. Elena Rodriguez would continue documenting the transformation of Atlas Airlines, ensuring that the company's commitment to change remained visible to the public. And Jonathan Rivers would transform his personal experience with discrimination into a corporate culture that valued dignity, respect, and equality for every passenger. As Atlas Airlines Flight 447 pulled up to the gate at JFK, it marked the end of Diana Blackwood's career and the beginning of a new era for Atlas Airlines. The story that began with a denied steak dinner had become a masterclass in how courage, documentation, and accountability could transform institutional bias into institutional justice. As Atlas Airlines Flight 447 pulled up to Gate B-23 at JFK International Airport, the scene outside resembled a major news event. Federal aviation authorities, civil rights investigators, corporate security personnel, and news crews had converged to document the landing of what had become the most widely watched discrimination incident in aviation history. Elena Rodriguez's TikTok live stream had reached over 600,000 concurrent viewers, with millions more following the story through shared clips and news coverage. Atlas Airlines accountability was trending globally as people around the world celebrated the real-time justice they had witnessed. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Diana Blackwood sat hunched in a galley seat, her career destroyed and federal charges looming. Captain Mitchell remained in the cockpit suspended and facing his own professional reckoning. Isabella Cruz was clutching her phone, still processing her promotion from flight attendant to director of service excellence in a single flight. Jonathan Rivers gathered his belongings with the calm efficiency of someone who had work to do. But before disembarking, he wanted to address the passengers who had witnessed the incident and supported accountability throughout the ordeal. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, standing in the first-class cabin one final time, "what happened today was inexcusable, but your response was extraordinary. You refused to let discrimination happen in silence. You documented injustice. You supported accountability. You showed that ordinary people have the power to demand extraordinary change." Dr. Patterson responded on behalf of the group, "Mr. Rivers, your composure and professionalism throughout this ordeal were remarkable. You've shown all of us how to respond to injustice with dignity and determination." Margaret Chen added her perspective. "From a legal standpoint, your decision to experience this discrimination firsthand, rather than intervening with your authority, created the evidence needed to address cultural problems that might otherwise have remained hidden." Richard Coleman's contribution carried the weight of personal transformation. "Sir, you've taught me something important about privilege and responsibility. I'll never again stay silent when I see discrimination happening regardless of whether it benefits me." Elena spoke for her global audience. "Mr. Rivers, hundreds of thousands of people watched you turn a moment of injustice into a lesson about accountability. This story is going to inspire change far beyond Atlas Airlines." As passengers began disembarking, federal agents boarded to escort Diana off the aircraft. She walked past Jonathan without making eye contact, her 28-year career ended by her own discriminatory actions. Isabella approached Jonathan as they prepared to leave the plane. "Mr. Rivers, I need to ask, when you offered me the promotion, was that because I spoke up or because you felt sorry for me?" Jonathan smiled, appreciating her directness. "Miss Cruz, I promoted you because you showed moral courage under pressure. You documented discrimination despite career risk, confronted authority when necessary, and refused to stay silent about injustice. Those are exactly the qualities Atlas Airlines needs in leadership positions." Isabella nodded, understanding that her promotion was earned through integrity rather than sympathy. As Jonathan walked up the jet bridge, he was met by Paul Henderson, Atlas Airlines HR Director, and Linda Zhang, the company's chief legal counsel, both of whom had received his emails during the flight. "Mr. Rivers," Paul said, his voice tight with stress, "we've been monitoring the situation through social media. The board is in emergency session and federal authorities want to interview you immediately." "Good," Jonathan replied. "We have a lot of work to do." Linda Zhang looked shaken by the magnitude of the legal exposure. "Sir, this incident has created significant liability for the company. We're facing potential federal civil rights violations, wrongful termination claims, and massive public relations damage." Jonathan's response surprised them both. "Linda, we're not going to fight these charges. We're going to embrace them as an opportunity to transform our culture. This incident revealed problems that have been festering for years. Our response will determine whether Atlas Airlines becomes a leader in civil rights compliance or a cautionary tale about corporate discrimination." As they walked through JFK Terminal, Jonathan was surrounded by news crews seeking comment about the incident. He paused to make a brief statement that would define Atlas Airlines' response to the crisis. "Today, I experienced discrimination aboard one of my own aircraft," he said, looking directly into the cameras. "What happened was inexcusable, but it revealed cultural problems that require immediate attention. Atlas Airlines is committed to becoming the aviation industry leader in civil rights compliance. We will implement the most comprehensive anti-discrimination training program in commercial aviation. We will create transparent reporting systems for bias incidents, and we will hold every employee accountable for treating every passenger with dignity and respect." A reporter called out, "Mr. Rivers, are you planning to sue your own airline?" Jonathan smiled. "I don't need to sue Atlas Airlines. I own Atlas Airlines. My goal isn't litigation, it's transformation. We're going to prove that American businesses can address discrimination proactively rather than reactively." Another reporter asked, "What happened to the flight attendant who discriminated against you?" "Diana Blackwood's employment with Atlas Airlines is terminated. She's facing federal investigation for civil rights violations and false accusations. But our focus isn't punishment, it's prevention. We're changing our culture so that what happened today never happens again." As Jonathan left the airport, Elena Rodriguez was still live streaming now with over 700,000 viewers watching the aftermath of the incident. "Atlas Airlines just showed us something incredible," she told her audience. "When discrimination happens in public, when people document it, when witnesses refuse to stay silent, change becomes inevitable. This isn't just about one airline. This is about how we respond to injustice wherever we find it." Over the following hours, the story continued to develop. Atlas Airlines' stock price initially dropped 12% before recovering as investors recognized the company's proactive response to the crisis. The Federal Aviation Administration announced a comprehensive review of airline discrimination policies industry-wide. Civil rights organizations praised Atlas Airlines' immediate accountability measures as a model for corporate response to bias incidents. Other airlines began implementing their own anti-discrimination training programs to avoid similar incidents. Isabella Cruz became a symbol of moral courage, with job offers from multiple airlines and speaking requests from civil rights groups. Diana Blackwood faced federal charges for civil rights violations and making false statements to aviation authorities. But the most significant outcome was the transformation of Atlas Airlines' corporate culture. Within 48 hours, Jonathan had implemented new policies that would make the airline an industry leader in civil rights compliance and passenger protection. The story that began with a denied steak dinner had become a catalyst for changing how American businesses respond to discrimination. And it had proven that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't anger, it's ownership. 6 months after Atlas Airlines Flight 447 landed at JFK, the transformation of the airline had become a case study taught at business schools around the world. What had begun as a viral discrimination incident had evolved into the most comprehensive civil rights reform program in aviation history. Jonathan Rivers stood in the boardroom of Atlas Airlines' renovated headquarters, looking out at the New York skyline as he prepared for the quarterly review meeting that would assess the company's progress toward cultural transformation. The changes had been dramatic and immediate. Within weeks of the incident, Atlas had implemented mandatory bias training for all employees, anonymous reporting systems for discrimination, and regular undercover assessments of service quality. Customer satisfaction scores among minority passengers had increased by 73%, while overall service ratings had reached record highs. But the most meaningful transformation was represented by Isabella Cruz, who had become the face of the company's commitment to equality and excellence. As Director of Service Excellence, Isabella had designed training programs that balanced premium service standards with civil rights compliance. Her presentations to airline industry conferences had become legendary, combining personal storytelling with practical strategies for preventing discrimination. The goal isn't just to avoid bias, she would tell audiences of airline employees. The goal is to create an environment where every passenger feels valued and respected. Excellent service isn't about treating some people better than others, it's about treating everyone exceptionally well. Isabella's program had been adopted by 12 other airlines, making her one of the most influential voices in aviation culture reform. Dr. James Patterson had remained connected to the story, serving as a consultant on Atlas Airlines' Medical Passenger Assistance Program while continuing his cardiac surgery practice. His testimony about Jonathan's composure during the discrimination incident had been cited in federal guidelines for handling bias complaints. "What I learned from Mr. Rivers," he often said when speaking about the incident, "is that dignity under pressure isn't just personal strength. It's a form of leadership that transforms everyone who witnesses it." Margaret Chen had used her legal expertise to help Atlas Airlines develop the most comprehensive civil rights compliance program in corporate America. Her pro bono work with the airline had resulted in policies that exceeded federal requirements and set new industry standards. This case proved something important she would tell law students. Real change doesn't come from lawsuits after discrimination happens. It comes from companies that proactively address bias before it damages people's lives. Richard Coleman had undergone his own transformation, becoming an advocate for bystander intervention training in luxury service environments. His real estate company had implemented policies requiring employees to speak up when they witnessed discrimination, and he regularly spoke about the responsibility of privileged people to challenge injustice. "I learned something shameful about myself on that flight," he would tell business audiences. "I benefited from discrimination by staying silent about it. But I also learned that it's never too late to change, to speak up, to do better." Elena Rodriguez had parlayed her documentation of the incident into a career as a civil rights journalist, specializing in exposing discrimination in unexpected places. Her follow-up series about Atlas Airlines' transformation had won multiple journalism awards and led to investigations of bias in other service industries. "The power of social media isn't just about making things go viral," she would tell journalism students. "It's about creating accountability in real time, forcing institutions to address problems they would otherwise ignore." Diana Blackwood had faced federal charges for civil rights violations and making false statements to aviation authorities. She received 2 years of probation and was permanently banned from working in the aviation industry. Her discriminatory training materials had become evidence in multiple federal investigations of airline bias. But the story had evolved beyond individual consequences to focus on institutional transformation and prevention. Jonathan Rivers had used his experience with discrimination to create something unprecedented, a major corporation that addressed bias proactively rather than reactively, that celebrated moral courage rather than punishing whistleblowers, that measured success by the dignity afforded to every customer. As he sat down for the quarterly review meeting, Jonathan reflected on the journey from that moment of discrimination to this moment of transformation. "Isabella," he said, looking at his Director of Service Excellence, "what are the latest numbers on passenger satisfaction?" Isabella smiled as she presented the data that validated their approach. "Overall satisfaction is up 34% from last year, with the highest increases among passengers from underrepresented communities. But, more importantly, we haven't had a single discrimination complaint upheld by federal investigators since we implemented the new protocols." Paul Henderson, who had survived the corporate restructuring by embracing the cultural changes, added his HR perspective. Employee satisfaction is also at record highs. People want to work for a company that stands for something meaningful. Our retention rates have improved dramatically. Linda Zhang provided the legal update. Federal authorities have closed their investigation with commendations for our proactive approach to civil rights compliance. The Department of Transportation is using our training programs as a model for industry-wide standards. But the most powerful validation came from passengers themselves. Letters poured in daily from travelers who felt respected, valued, and welcomed aboard Atlas Airlines. Many specifically mentioned feeling comfortable flying as minorities for the first time in years. One letter that particularly moved Jonathan came from a young black businessman who wrote, "I flew Atlas Airlines last week and received service that was both professional and warm. For the first time in my life, I didn't worry about whether I belonged in first class. I just enjoyed the flight. Thank you for proving that change is possible." As the meeting concluded, Jonathan stood up to address his team one final time. 6 months ago, I experienced discrimination that revealed everything wrong with our culture. Today, we've created a company that represents everything right about American business. We've proven that facing problems honestly creates stronger institutions than hiding them behind excuses. He looked around the room at the team that had helped transform Atlas Airlines from a company that enabled discrimination into an industry leader in civil rights. The real measure of our success isn't that we fixed a problem. It's that we created a culture where problems can't flourish in silence, where employees feel empowered to speak up about injustice, where passengers know they'll be treated with dignity regardless of their appearance or background. Isabella raised her hand with a final thought. "Mr. Rivers, what happened on Flight 447 was wrong. But what we've built since then proves that every moment of injustice is an opportunity for transformation. We've shown that companies can choose to be better, not just because it's profitable, but because it's right." The meeting ended with a sense of accomplishment that went beyond business metrics to something deeper. The satisfaction of creating meaningful change in response to meaningful problems. Atlas Airlines had become more than a transportation company. It had become proof that American businesses could address bias proactively, treat discrimination as a catalyst for improvement, and create cultures that celebrated dignity for every customer. The transformation that began with a denied steak dinner had become a revolution in corporate accountability and civil rights leadership. 3 months later, Atlas Airlines was awarded the Corporate Excellence in Civil Rights Award by the NAACP, recognizing the company's transformation from discrimination incident to industry leadership. Jonathan Rivers accepted the award not as a CEO who had solved a problem, but as someone who had turned personal injustice into institutional change. Isabella Cruz spoke at the ceremony representing the thousands of airline employees who had embraced cultural transformation over corporate defensiveness. Her words resonated far beyond aviation. Change doesn't require permission from the people who created the problems. It requires courage from the people willing to create solutions. The ripple effects extended throughout the service industry. Hotels, restaurants, and retail companies began implementing Atlas standards for civil rights compliance, proving that one company's commitment to dignity could inspire broader cultural transformation. Diana Blackwood's story became a cautionary tale in business schools and professional training programs. Her descent from senior executive to federal defendant illustrated how personal bias could destroy both individual careers and corporate reputations. But more importantly, her case demonstrated that accountability was possible even for long-term employees who seemed untouchable. The federal investigation revealed that discrimination incidents had been reported at Atlas Airlines for years, but were routinely dismissed or minimized by management. Jonathan's experience had forced the company to confront uncomfortable truths about its culture and implement changes that protected both passengers and employees who reported bias. Elena Rodriguez continued documenting the airline's progress, creating a year-long series about corporate accountability that won multiple journalism awards. Her work proved that social media could be a force for justice when used to document truth rather than spread rumors. Dr. Patterson, Margaret Chen, and Richard Coleman remained connected to the story, serving as advisors to Atlas Airlines' ongoing civil rights initiatives. Their willingness to serve as witnesses and advocates had been crucial to ensuring that the incident resulted in meaningful change rather than corporate cover-up. But perhaps the most powerful legacy was the simplest Atlas Airlines had proven that treating every passenger with dignity wasn't just morally right, it was incredibly profitable. The company's customer satisfaction scores, employee retention rates, and financial performance all reached record highs as the airline attracted travelers who wanted to support businesses that shared their values. 6 months after Flight 447, Jonathan Rivers received a letter from a young girl whose family had flown Atlas Airlines for the first time. She wrote, "Dear Mr. Rivers, my mom said you made your airplane a place where everyone is welcome. Thank you for making me feel like I belong in first class just like everyone else." The letter reminded Jonathan that the most important transformation wasn't in company policies or training programs. It was in the experience of individual passengers who no longer had to worry about discrimination when they traveled. Change wasn't just about fixing problems. It was about creating hope. And sometimes one person's refusal to accept injustice could inspire an entire industry to choose dignity over discrimination, accountability over excuses, and courage over silence. If this story of justice and transformation moved you, I want you to do something right now. Hit that like button to show your support for companies that choose to do the right thing. Subscribe to this channel because we're committed to bringing you stories that matter. Stories that inspire change, and stories that prove ordinary people can create extraordinary impact when they refuse to stay silent about injustice. But most importantly, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who's experienced discrimination and needs to know that accountability is possible. Share it with someone in a position of power who needs to understand their responsibility to create change. Share it with someone who's ever wondered whether speaking up makes a difference. Because what happened on Atlas Airlines Flight 447 proves that when good people document injustice, when witnesses refuse to stay silent, and when leaders choose accountability over excuses, even the most entrenched discrimination can be transformed into hope. Your voice matters. Your witness matters. Your willingness to speak up for what's right can change everything. So don't just watch these stories, be part of writing the next one. Like, subscribe, share, and remember that sometimes the most powerful revolution begins with one person refusing to accept that this is just how things are. Thanks for watching, and keep fighting for a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect.